In today's tutorial, we are going to be making a flawlessly blended AT-ST from Star Wars Legion. Now, we have painted some Star Wars Legion before. We did this with a focus on traditional dry brushing, but we're going to be involving some stippling, and rather than a disheveled, beaten up old hulk of an AT-ST, we're going to be doing a kind of factory ready, perfect one. It'll still have some wear and tear on it, but we're going to be getting some beautiful smooth blends across those lovely panels. It's a plastic model, it's really made for this. We are of course going to be using Artis Opus Series D, and a primary focus in this is going to be how to use your dampening pad, how to get the most out of it, and how to let it kind of work with you in order to achieve and unlock those beautiful blends normally associated with airbrushing. So let's jump in. Okay, so here we have Series D. I'm going to grab the dampening pad, and then for this tutorial I will jump between brushes, but I'm going to be using an extra large, at least for the starting portions. Get asked this question a lot. The right amount of water is 1 drop from the back of your brush, pressed in. Now obviously if you're using a bigger brush, I'm using an extra large, it's going to take more water. Work it in really thoroughly, and then take a dry finger, and you should have a light sheen of moisture. If you have more than a light sheen like I had there, work it in a little bit more, go to another dry finger. That's about perfect. So that's how I make sure I've got the right amount of water on my brush. This is here to help paint exit before, during, and after the painting process, just in the same way that you might put in thinner to your airbrush cup before you put in paint, so you've not got paint going on naked metal. Exactly the same type of principle here. So with some added to my brush, I'm going to remove the excess on my hand, so I'm making sure to remove off any excess, even from this, but that brush now has been slightly moistened, and that's going to help all the paint leave beautifully during the painting process. Using our dampening pad, as I outlined before, I'm going to take some of our Eshin Grey here. I'm going to mix it with a dark Reaper. Now, if you don't like the idea of mixing paints, that's absolutely fine. You can use more than me and just go through a colour sequence outlined by whatever paint brand you like. Obviously, it is a little bit easier to match colours if you're not mixing paints. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be imagining a light source here, and what I mean by that is if we tilt it at the angle of my lamp, let's say that the light is coming from here, that is the angle that I want to be going for. That's natural for me as well as I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to work top right to bottom left. That's why you'll see me often choosing that exact pattern in our tutorials. And that means that I'm going to be darker in the bottom left-hand section. So pretty much all of the model is going to get base coated with this. It's our darkest color. We're not looking to have pure black anywhere really. And the other contributing factor to this, just going to put in a little bit more moisture there. Another contributing factor is that we really want to make sure that we've got a nice hand-painted base coat for our dry brushing to be going over. It goes fairly well over primers, but dry brushing, like a lot of painting, layering and traditional painting, it goes better over similar applications to itself. So I'm going to be getting a nice smooth stippled base coat pretty much all over. I'm not holding in mind direction or anything yet, and if I've missed any areas during priming, I can catch it with these colours. So nice high quality base coat there. We can see we've not got any, like big drifts of paint or anything like that. We've used the dampening pad to keep it nice and thin, and I'm going to do this all over the model. Now, if you're worried about putting down something too thick, you can use more moisture than normal. Don't worry, you're never gonna, I'm not oversaturating my brush, but you're never gonna get a negative result from doing more thin layers. There's no reason not to use the same principles that we've learned with traditional painting, traditional miniature painting that is, 2 thin coats, etc. On our miniature here. So if you're worried about getting a thick base coat, you've not stippled before, then you can dilute your paint more, and you can do this 2-3 times, however many times you think is necessary. Now I've actually decided that Fenrisian Grey is probably going to end up being a little bit too bluey for my liking. So I'm going to skip right to the Ulthuan Grey, and what we're going to do here is we're just going to combine it with our previous mix. Now obviously this is a much lighter colour, so it's going to have a pretty instantaneous effect. I'm going to be using a very small amount, and we'll test it in whatever is planned to be the brightest area of our model. So I'm still using dilution carefully to show that kind of patina we've built up there. It's not perfectly smooth in terms of the blend, but it's all going to fade into the background, and it will add some visual interest for that kind of lack of flawless perfection. And at the end of it, it should look pretty amazing and also quite interesting as a result. So now I've got my lighter colour, looking more at the top right sections where I said my light source is going to be. I'm going to start stippling with those. Bearing the direction in mind, make sure to change the angles of your model and hold in mind your light source. So if I've said my light's coming from here, while I'm looking at the front, it's very easy to forget that these kind of, whatever they are, look like eyebrows. These need some TLC too. So bear all of that in mind and just patiently stipple it on and then fade it out down here. So as you work your paint off your brush, you'll have less and less, and that means you can bring it down without any worry of it kind of doing anything untoward there. I'm going to begin to do some traditional dry brushing here. So these smaller sections where we can get away with kind of just going for edges and stuff like that, we're beginning to build up now, and I do this after I've taken off the excess with the stippling. So once I know that my brush isn't saturated, everything's behaving as it should, that's when I start considering doing the traditional dry brushing. And basically you start off pretty much 100% stipple and you'll end up 100% dry brush, and as you go through these stages you will use less stippling and more dry brushing, and you can always step back and go back to do the others if there's anything you need to fix, but generally speaking that's a really solid rule of thumb. Now if you've done anything that looks like it's not delicate enough, rather than going back and mixing up more paint, what I do is I go to the dampening pad, work the moisture into my brush, and then I use this diluted mix just as a way to transition between that kind of blocky part and the other section. So don't worry, it's really, really hard to make mistakes with this technique that cannot be fixed. In those darker sections, we're beginning to involve some more of the traditional dry brushing, and I will start building up kind of oppositional stuff. So you'll notice that generally speaking, my directions are coming from top right, but to make sure I catch those bottom edges, I'm going to use a rolling motion and a really light pressure, and I'm going to carefully start touching those edges. So this is the type of base coat you can look to achieve if you are watering things down a lot. Now, like I said, this isn't flawless, but I'd say we're going here for impressionism rather than photorealism, and what we will end up with is a really, really good impression of light and volume and, ironically, realism as a result. So we just want that fade. It doesn't need to be flawless, but we're going to get it looking very, very organic, even though it's on an inorganic surface. So that's pretty much it for the lighter stage. We can now add some more of our white. Basically at this point, with my painting at least, you might be changing between different colors, but I am just going to continue to add incrementally more white to my process. And as I've already mentioned a couple of times, I'll be using more dry brushing and less stippling. I'm still going to be testing my my stuff on my palette and on the back of my hand as well before I take it to the model, but all the principles stay the same. So I'm still going to be starting in those top right hand corners where I want things to be brighter, and then at the point at which I'm happy with kind of how the brush is behaving, which isn't yet, I might be, after I've gone back to the pad, I'll start trying out some more brave stuff with you know, the dry brushing. We don't want streaking. Now we're using round dry brushes, we're not using flats. That's helpful for that, but the most helpful thing is to make sure that you have the right dilution and the right amount of paint on your brush. So all these areas that are going to be heavily highlighted, I can change to a different side of the model if I wish. I'm going to go for first before I jump onto my kind of ballsy dry brushing. Using pressure very carefully, you can see I start off with a firm grip in the heavy areas, and then I transition to a much lighter, floppier grip. So to show you again on another section, firm grip here, and then as I fade, you'll see I literally pull my fingers back on the brush to a point and I hold it more loosely. It's a lot more of a floppy grip at this stage. And that does a few things. Firm will help you get a kind of a more accurate, specific and heavy coat, and then obviously floppy, that's going to leave you more flexible. Now at the point at which I'm happy with how much paint is on the brush, we can pretty much, however we like, approach the dry brushing of the rest of the model, building up these layers. And even if you can't tell it instantly, it is doing work. It is layering stuff there, and this will all add up to be significant in the final part of the paint job. So I'm just going to carry on adding white as we go. Now, as you can see, this is really starting to take shape, and it is in the last kind of, the last 10% of the work makes it look like you've spent 80% of your time on it. It really does make a big difference. So what I'm doing here is now, rather than taking my white to my dark, I'm taking my dark to my white. I'm going to pull a little bit of this in and a little bit of the non-bluey grey. Now we need to be really careful with this. As you progress to the lighter colors, you have to use less and less pressure, and you also have to use less and less paint. There is going to be more contrast to whatever you do. You can switch to a clean or small brush. Here I might be tempted to switch to a medium or something, but for now I'm just going to test it as ever. We're testing it from that top right hand corner of this panel. I've actually been too careful there, I've removed too much off. Far better than too little though. Remember, if your brush is wet from the dampening pad and you work off excess, so I've just taken some white, I'm not only working off excess, but I'm also mixing paint within the brush because I haven't gone to a new brush. I've got loads of the greys in there kind of historically from the previous stages, so don't be surprised if suddenly you've mixed up paint and it might even appear darker. Just be aware of what you've got going on inside your brush, what your previous layers were, and you can always jump to a new brush, particularly if you're doing kind of small delicate stages. It might even be helpful to drop to a more delicate size just to aid that kind of detailing. Okay, so to put my money where my mouth is, here is a medium. So with utmost care now, because this is going to be a uncontaminated brush, I'm going to take some of the white, very softly test that. There we go, looking super crisp. So that is one section of it. I'm going to do the entire thing bearing all of these principles in mind. So I'm not going to be doing anything new even when I jump to the legs. Same colors, same sequence, same ideas. We're going to get this miniature done top to bottom. You could absolutely jump to a pure white. Now I've specifically gone to Ulthuan grey here. This is not a pure white. If I put it next to something like White Sky, you'll see there is a little bit of difference between the two. This means that I've got something for super stark edge highlights if I want to, entirely up to you. All right, so that is the top turret done. Of note, I ended up missing out some sections like this. I should have jumped to a smaller brush. Medium's absolutely fine for that sooner, just to get in there and underneath and around these fiddly bits. I've left things removable, but you know, don't be lazy like I am. Get in there at the base coating stage and make sure you do get those, because black will stand out. Even if it's in recesses, won't be awful, but you'll get a much better result if you do that. Looking really solid. That's how long it took to finish it off. Way faster off camera. The larger the thing that you're doing, the more there might be a need to kind of keep it in a restricted section. So for me, all of this at once, apart from the bottom, was just about doable, but I think any larger than that, I would have had to break it down into particular sections. But it's looking great, so we just need to add some legs. As I touched on before, you can jump to a lighter final white if you want. You don't have to jump all the way, so I'm actually going to use a 50-50 mix of Ulthuan and White Scar, which I've got here on my palette. I've got a new brush to the painting, not a brand new brush, but it's one that hasn't been used to paint a large amount of dark grey, which is the issue we're going to have. And what we're going to do is we're going to use very light pressure to kind of finish these legs up. They only took an hour on top of what we had, so about half an hour to do all of these. They're a bit more rough and ready, but with a little bit of careful edge highlighting, I think we can get pretty much the same result. Obviously the cockpit is going to be taking most of the attention of the paint job, so I've got these big smooth lines, but what I want to do here is to achieve a really crisp edge highlight as fast as possible. So you can change a lot of things during dry brushing. You can change how wet your paint is, you can change how much paint is on your brush, and you can paint the pressure with which that you're painting. So what I'm using here is I'm using pressure very carefully. I've actually got slightly more paint than I would have normally on the brush, but I'm making sure I don't get more leaving than I would like by doing it very gently. And I'm going to scoot all over the entirety of the model, just catching edges for a crisp, bright, light bit that's really going to jump out. And particularly given that this is meant to be it's not a creature, it's a machine. This should help catch some nice sharp edges and really kind of really, you know, like ram home that theme of it being sharp, crisp, machine tooled edges. So I can go all over the model doing this. Careful with my pressure. Again, I do that by taking my grip further back down the ferrule to around where it meets the wooden handle and just letting it flop around a bit more. I'm going to be using rolling to make sure I hit edges from particular angles. I'll do that all over the entire vehicle and then we'll be done. And we are done. Look at that, awesome job. pretty easy, lovely model to work with, and really kind of fundamental techniques in order to be able to up your game with dry brushing. Worked out absolutely brilliantly. A base will make a really big difference with this. Because we've chosen cool greys, any sandy, warm base that was working its way up the miniature would really add a lot in terms of contrast. We are done. That's about 90 minutes. That is phenomenal for 90 minutes work. I am super pleased with that. As is usually the case, it looks about half done for 80% of the paint job, then the last 20% looks like you did 80% of the work. It turns out I've made quite a lot of assembly mistakes with this guy, so do let me know below if you've noticed them. I shared some thumbnails with some friends when it was finished, and it turns out I think there's at least 3 mistakes there. Oh well, he's particularly tall. That's one of them. He shouldn't be that tall. He's shooting over a tree. The model's turned out really well. Not only have we got that beautiful transition, we've got that lovely crisp edge highlighting as well, and that's all been done with the same technique. It's not like we've had to, you know, like put away the airbrush, get out the fine detail brushes to do the edge highlighting. It's just all part and parcel of the same technique. It's done really efficiently, and that means that if you did want to do other layering, edge highlighting, chipping, weathering, anything like that, putting him in a warm basing environment and taking that up his legs with a form of pigments or washes or anything like that, it would all be phenomenal. And you've spent so little time getting it to that really high foundational level there. Like if your aim was to spend 3 hours on the model and you were going to be using loads of fancy stuff, you've got it pretty much done in 90 minutes. So if you want to spend another half hour on that model, it's all going to be on stuff that is really noticeable and makes it look amazing, or you can put that time as the base or whatever. The kits are incredible. They're a joy to assemble, and I hate assembly. Anyone's ever spoken to me about assembly or heard me moan about it, I really do not enjoy it. So the Star Wars Legion figures are incredibly well designed for that. There's a video on our Instagram if you want to check it out about just how much I actually enjoyed the assembly. So, you know, stranger things have happened. Not this year though. This year's been full of strange things. So on that note, I hope that we are all looking forward to 2021. We have some amazing hobby projects ourselves planned. Let me know your hobby projects below. Let us know what you'd like to see us tackling next year, and have a fantastic new year. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. And very soon at 30k subs, I'll be painting a Demon of Khorne army in 24 hours, which might be 24 hours straight. We'll see how ballsy I'm feeling about that. It might make for a more entertaining video. Bye.